Hello and welcome back to Season 2, Episode 4 of Only a Bag, a travel podcast. I am your host, Nathaniel Mellor, and with me as always
is your other host, Darcy Milton.
Darcy, what are we talking about today?
We're talking about what there is to see in Florence.
We're going to talk about what there is to see in Florence. And before we get into that, not a word from today's sponsor, but there's a fan running in the background, so if you hear a dull it is our fan. It is almost 100 degrees here in Rome. We did a very special episode on the heat yesterday, day before.
Something like that. I've lost track. My brain is a little bit melting from the heat.
Yes, we have a couple more days of this. I think we have 5 or 6 more days of this, and then it's supposed to dip back down a little bit. So please forgive us if we stop making sense and forget what we're saying, like it happened a few times on that heat episode. So to get started talking about Florence, we left off talking about Florence as a day trip from Rome. Mm-hmm. And maybe the first thing to talk about is the fact that when we say it's a day trip from Rome, we don't mean you can see everything in Florence in a day.
Definitely not.
And it happens, I think, that a lot of people, from my very, very brief research on like Medium and things like that, a lot of people make Florence like a one day of their Italy trip or one day of the European trip, where they get in, see some stuff, go to sleep, wake up, see some more stuff, and then get on a late train or something like that to the next town.
Oof.
And as we're going to talk about it, it's gonna seem like that's not that possible, I think.
I don't think it's that possible, but I mean, people do it. It doesn't seem enjoyable, if I'm being honest.
Seems rough.
Mm-hmm.
Because there are a lot of things, I think, to do in Florence. And I mean, I guess I should put this in perspective. Like, we don't really talk about, like, what to see and what to do in Rome.
Yeah, we haven't really.
Yeah, like, there's the Colosseum, and there's the Pantheon, and there's the Roman Forum. There's a lot of, like...
all of the art museums.
And that's so the thing, though. There's so many art museums in Rome, and a lot of it is, like, private collections lent to the city collections, and so you get this sense that they're all kind of scattered around Rome, and it's not like...
But there are several national museums as well that are scattered around.
Well, and I think there's, like, the Etruscan Museum right next to, like, the Modern Art Museum or something like that.
And there's 2 crypts.
And there's 2 crypts. There's a lot of crypts, a lot of dead people in Rome. 3, I guess, if you count the Vatican. Can you go in the Vatican crypts?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm not sure.
I think so. I think you can go kind of like the first level or whatever.
3?
3 crypts. No, so all this is to say, it's like there's so much to do in Rome, and it kind of seems... It's the same reason, and we've talked about this, it's the same reason we don't talk about, like, where to eat in Rome, because it's kind of like... Unless there's a very specific angle, like the budget eats or I don't know, the best Indian food in Rome.
Mm-hmm. Or the best gelato.
I mean,
we can tell you that, yeah.
Absolutely. We've talked about that, I think, at length. And we'll be happy to continue to do so. But no, I think it's like there's so much variation of food in Rome. It's like even with budget eats, it's like, you know, the best food is probably going to be in some small neighborhood somewhere that's quite off the beaten path because it's really just for the residents, not necessarily in a place where the rent is astronomical and they have to kind of cut corners.
Right, in the center of town.
In the center of town, yeah. So when it comes to a place like Florence, though, because everything's a little bit more condensed, and there are, in relation, I think, far fewer things to see. And I think part of it, we talked about it in the first Florence episode, it's a newer city. Mm-hmm. It's like Florence, in the way that we view it, has only been around for 700 years, 800 years.
Since the 1400s?
Yeah. So it's, I mean, versus Rome, where, you know, half the stuff you're seeing has been around for like 2,500 years.
Yeah, thousands of years. Yeah.
So it's a little bit like, I think there's a little bit of variation there. There's a little bit of like a slight variation there.
But also our perspective is very different. I mean, we've lived in Rome. We've lived in several different places in southern Italy, but we haven't ever lived in Florence. We've just visited. So we just come from a different place, basically.
I think that's what like this podcast episode might be kind of more about, like, as much as I think we like giving people like the insider's view on like Rome, especially, for instance, it's a little bit difficult because, and even as we keep talking about our family coming to visit, but we realize when they're like, okay, where do we go to eat in this neighborhood? And I'm like, this is like one of the most expensive neighborhoods in Rome. I don't know where to go eat in this neighborhood. It's every plate is like $22 a plate. I've never been here. So it's a little bit more difficult because, you know, I'm like, I can bring you to a neighborhood that's like $10 a plate or $15 a plate or $5 a plate. So I think there's that kind of variation. I use that word a lot, but I mean, like, it's hard to kind of think of, well, it's, it's just another Italian city. It's a little bit more like, well, it it is, but it's also kind of a very different Italian city in the sense that it's not
Florence from Rome.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
They're completely different places.
And I think our information about Florence is like we just found the best places that we liked as tourists, not necessarily the best places in Florence to eat.
As
It's
a
just
local.
As a local, right. And that's not what we're talking about necessarily this episode. That was just sort of more to prime everybody on the fact that like a lot of this is a little bit more, is going to be different information for Florence, or different kind of information for Florence than the kind of information we gave for Rome.
Mm-hmm.
Though we will try to, I think, cover some of that same territory. And some of it is simply the fact that I think with Rome, one of the first things we mentioned is like there's no toilet seats in most bathrooms. You will, and we like it almost, we thought it was really only like public toilets, like cafes, bars, restaurants. And then we started looking at Airbnbs it was maybe in like Cinque Terre or something like that, where a lot of the reviews were like, there was no toilet seat on the toilet. There was it was like shower curtain. It was like, and if, the owner responds like, yeah, I told you that before coming in. You can see it in the photos. That's not something we provide. And it's like, and of course they don't expect you to bring your own toilet seat or shower curtain. It's more of just, it's easier to clean a bathroom that way, I guess.
I have no idea. I cannot answer that question.
Figure that out? Yeah. So I think we mentioned that in the Rome episode, and we're going to mention that, I think, in pretty much every city episode, because if you're only listening to one of these episodes, if you're only listening to like the one that matters the most to you, then it makes sense that you wouldn't really listen to the other ones. And so we want to make sure you still have some of the basic information, which is, first and foremost, there is no toilet seat in
a lot of bathrooms, yeah. And bring your own little pack of like tissues to use as toilet paper, just in case.
Very much so. There's no toilet paper either. So that's like, I think that's a basic, just because it's one of those things that, yeah, if you're expecting like, I'm gonna pop off here, get a coffee, have a pee, and then you're like, oh, well, maybe not. This is sort of, and then sometimes, like I think in Rue Maggiore, once there was no toilet, it was like a little, like the kind of hole in the floor thing.
Yes, I had never seen that in Italy before.
Yeah, it's not a very Italian thing. I mean, it's obviously, it's a toilet. It's like in China, it was everywhere.
Right.
But it wasn't, it isn't Italian.
No.
But again, it makes things, I think it's really just for when you have a lot of tourists and a lot of turnover, it makes things really easy to clean, because you just...
Except it didn't make using the bathroom faster, though, because we were all standing in line coming out going, is this the bathroom? You guys seeing this? Everybody seeing this in line? All right, 5 strange people I've never met before. Let's all talk about this toilet situation.
Yeah. So I don't know if it made anything quicker at all. But, and I think as we move forward, it'll be, I mean, when we talk about next episode, we're going to talk about food and drinks and things like that we like in little restaurants and whatnot in Florence. And we'll talk about how to order a coffee if, again, you haven't been to Italy before, it's your first time. So we will kind of get into a lot of those basics that we talked about for Rome. But this episode is going to focus on galleries, museums, and like things to see, but also a little bit at the very end. We're going to talk briefly about shopping, and not so much like the normal places to shop. We were going to try to provide some alternative places, like if you wanted leather goods, or if you wanted I don't know, small knickknacks, something to bring back, something to be like, oh, this is like
a little token of your trip, or little gifts or whatever. Yeah.
We're gonna try, because there are. I mean, it's like like any other city. It's just filled with stores to buy stuff.
Yeah, as cities do.
Typically do. So the first thing we should talk about, I guess, is the museum, the galleries, right?
Yeah, I feel like top of mind for me is the Uffizi.
Right.
I think I've probably said this before in other episodes, but the Uffizi is huge.
Yeah.
I think we spent about 4 hours going through.
About at least, yeah, somewhere in there, 4 to 5 hours.
Or maybe 5 hours. And we were strolling. I mean, I did not linger at every piece of art for sure, but I laid my eyes around the room, every room that I could find, and then, lingered at pieces that I really liked. So that's just to give you a perspective. Again, I think we said in another episode, but you can take a tour, obviously, of the Uffizi. But most of those will, at least everyone that we saw happening, took the tours through very specific items. What would you call it?
Yeah,
like pieces?
Like pieces of work.
Yeah. So they went to, some of the bigger, more well-known pieces, but then completely missed a large portion of the museum, and people couldn't break off from the tour. They were just, running you through the museum to the 10 things that they think you should see. So it took us a long time because we went on our own, and it's not a place that I think you and I we couldn't see 2 museums in a day if the Uffizi were one of the places we were seeing.
And I think part of that does go, I mean, because you have to get tickets, I think, for both of these ahead of time, or is it the Uffizi was ahead of time? And I want to be honest, like a lot of this might change when you're there, dear listener, wherever you are, because we did go at the very tail end of COVID.
There were still some restrictions in place and like those COVID extra rules and things.
Yeah, and a lot of it had to do with like how many people could be in at a place at once. So I think the Uffizi had to reserve tickets, but the Accademia, you just sort of showed up and bought tickets then and there. But you could there was also a line for having reserved your ticket online, but it didn't seem to be like going any quicker, because again it was like basically you were and we'll talk about the Accademia in a second, but I'm comparing it because the Uffizi was like, there wasn't really a line. You just go up. You're like, I have my ticket for 2:30, whatever. It's like, great, here's your ticket. The 2:30 opening, whatever, starts in a few minutes. But the Accademia was the same way, except they were only letting in chunks of like 50 people at a time. So you might be outside for a few hours just waiting just to get in. But I think also something to mention the Uffizi is, again, especially if you're going in the summer. We did not go in the summer. We went in like September, which is technically, I guess, summer, but not temperaturely summer. Temporally it is, I guess, summer. But it was still pretty warm, and it's not fully air conditioned because it's it's a couple 100-year-old,
and it's huge, like
yeah,
I said.
it's massive, it's drafty, so and some rooms are for sure, because they have to be like, I think some of the pieces have to be kind of, I think, because
temperature regulated.
Yeah,
yes.
And so some rooms are like, ooh, this is refreshingly nice, and then
some of it's kind of open air in like the what is that the passageway thing?
Yeah, it's almost like the
gallery.
It's sort of a glassed-in porch is really almost what it is. It's like kind of you're walking around.
Yeah.
And it's ridiculously hot there because it's glassed in and you're just sweltering, and it's kind of like the way that you like. It's set up in a really interesting way, I think, where there's a group of rooms and then they're only accessed by that passageway. So everybody's kind of going into this group of rooms, seeing all these art, leaving the same way they came in, and then going to the next group of rooms. So there's the passageways often filled with people, really quite toasty, and it's like the only place we found seating in the whole. So that's something, if it's just as far as a concern, because if you're thinking, basically, I'm like my top of mind when I think museums, I think like Met or something like that in New York, where it's like fully air conditioned. There's benches in every room.
Yeah, you're right.
It's it's a little, there's like really well placed elevators and things like that. It's a lot like escalators. It's a lot, very easy to get around, and it's hard to convert a few 100-year-old palace or whatever, I think it was a palace, into a into a state of the art sort of modern building.
Fully functional. Modernly functional.
And even like the Louvre in Paris struggles with that, because there's a couple wings that I remember going where it was like an oven, and then the rest of it that was the more modern built or more contemporary built wings were like really nice and like, oh, that's what a museum should look like, and then the rest was like, oh, this is beautiful and I'm on fire. So that's something, again, it's like if you're coming this summer, and it's a consideration, is I think the heat, humidity. It's not. We talked about, that's just top of mind for us right now because we're both just sweating. There's no air conditioning, both in this apartment and in most apartments, I think, in Rome don't have air conditioning. So if heat and being kind of like trying to pack as many of these things into one day as possible is a concern for you, one thing to consider is there's not many places to rest and sit down. It is quite toasting some of the rooms, but also I think you and I were just exhausted after 4 hours. It's just a lot of standing and then like a little walking, and you don't really get like a full walk going on. You get that shuffle thing in most rooms, and as you mentioned, because these tours, some of the rooms are packed with people. I can't even remember his name, but he did the wedding portrait of the two people facing each other.
I should know his name. I do
know
not.
It's a Donatello, somebody like that. It's definitely not, but Darcy is shaking her head at me. She's like, it's for sure not. Believe it or not, I don't know much about art. However, that room is like packed with people, and then like one room over is empty because there is no, famous Renaissance painter. However, we saw a lot of very poorly painted hands and feet because apparently they taught classes on faces back then, but not hands and feet. They really just sort of like and hands. You've seen these before.
Yeah, I will say. I mean, I really enjoy looking at art. So grain of salt. If you don't enjoy that. But I really, really enjoy looking at art, and I think the Uffizi is definitely a must-see if you do as well. But, I mean, number one, to look at pretty pictures and really interesting paintings and sculptures. But also, if you're an artist like me, it's kind of really sad, but also cool to see that there are some not very technically proficient paintings. I mean, there's some paintings that are not great, if I'm being honest.
For sure.
So that it's just interesting to see that. And there's Caravaggio's. There's at least one Artemisia Gentileschi, who's one of my favorites.
And there's also the Birth of Venus.
I like to call it Venus on the half shell.
Yes.
That's not the name of it.
But it is Venus standing on a half of a shell. I think that's Botticelli. And no, there's it's a handful of well-known, obviously, painters in the Uffizi, and there's also like thousands of paintings that just have like unknown Venetian master or whatever it would have been, or Sienese master.
And a lot of great sculptures too, obviously.
Gorgeous
I mean,
sculptures,
here I am like, that's a great sculpture. I'm not an art critic.
No, but there's some beautiful
sculptures.
And that's and again, that's about like we took about 4 hours. It's nice. It's like you can kind of basically if you start early enough in the morning, you get tickets for the morning. You finish at lunch and then you kind of go and rest somewhere because. Again, it's that sort of thing of standing on hard surfaces is like a lot worse than just walking on hard surfaces or something else. I mean, it's just
it's hard on your body.
Yeah,
sure.
it just feels quite hard rather than walking around the city, which at least you're getting like blood flowing and things like that. There's also the Galleria dell'Accademia, the Academy Gallery.
Yep.
And that's kind of the famous one for basically that's where David is.
And other things. It's quite small.
That's the thing.
Surprisingly.
It almost was one of those things that it took us more time to get into the gallery.
Oh, absolutely.
Than to actually see everything.
Yeah.
And there's there's beautiful sculptures. It's actually tons of sculptures in the Accademia. And a part of it, I think, was closed when we were there. I think part of it because we were expecting way more sculptures than we saw. And there was one wing that was closed. And I mean, David's beautiful, and they kind of have him not quite in the middle of the room, but you can kind of go around and see the whole sculpture rather than just like the front of him. And it's beautiful, and there are paintings of there as well. But I think it's almost one of those things because there's also a statue of David in front of the Palazzo Vecchio, which is, if you're going to be in Florence, you're going to run into the Palazzo Vecchio at some point. It's in the Piazzale della
Signoria.
Signoria, I think.
I always say that wrong. Yeah.
Sort of there's a major. It's not where the Duomo is, basically. So if you happen to be in that little piazza, it's not there. It's near there. There's a little piazza, and there's the Palazzo Vecchio, and in front of that is where David had. I think.
And it's a direct. It's like a 1-to-1 replica of David, is it not?
I thought so, yeah. I think it's supposed to be the same side. It's basically supposed to, because I think David was supposed to be on the church, and then he'd be so high up that they were like, that's beautiful, it shouldn't be that high up, we should have it somewhere more prominent. They put it in front of the Palazzo Vecchio, and then because of just like rain and wear and tear and stuff like that, they're like, we should probably stick this inside. This is too nice to be ruining. So they had somebody, I think in like, I want to say the 1800s or early 1900s, but I thought the 1800s, somebody created a replica.
I think so.
Or they commissioned somebody to create a replica, and they put it there, and then put David's.
Actual David.
Yeah, in the, I guess, in a gallery. I don't know if it was actually Accademia at the time.
But now it's the Accademia.
But now it's the Accademia. So all that is to say is some people do skip David only because there's not as much in the Accademia as there is in the Uffizi, and they're both about 20 euros. And it's one of those things, if you are like only there for a day and you're making tough choices and you're like, I want to see everything, it can feel like those are the kind of the two choices, because they both take about 4 hours. One, just because you have to stand in line for 2 hours.
At least we did, yeah.
At least we did. And I don't think we ever saw it, though, with a short line.
No.
So, and that's just because, again, I don't know what their there's like they charge to pre-reserve a ticket, but even the people who pre-reserve tickets still had to wait in line. It was this whole thing that might be different now, that because I think that was more of a COVID regulation than anything else, and that might have changed since then. We both enjoyed the Accademia, I think, quite a bit.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
And if you're in, obviously, if you're going to Florence for the art, you should absolutely be checking out the Accademia.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, if seeing David's on your bucket list, go to the Accademia. It's great.
No, for sure. I mean, it's.
But if you're like, David, could take him or leave him.
Yeah.
But you want to see more art, I wouldn't choose the Accademia.
Personally, yeah.
But there's also the PD Palace.
Yes.
I can't say that word right either. But we did not go there. However, I just want to give a little shout out to my girl, Artemisia Gentileschi. A lot of her work is in the PD Palace, and a lot of other great paintings.
And some other stuff as well.
Some other stuff, yeah. Who cares about it?
And that's great. That's actually across the river, and they have a huge gardens behind there, which, again, we did not go into them, but they seem gorgeous from above on Google Maps, which is about as close as we got.
It is a bit of a walk. I mean, it was great for me and you, but I was seeing some other tired people. I mean, that's not to say that you and I are super strong. It's just that we happened to not be tired, and if you're spending a long day wandering around Florence, it is a bit of a walk from basically the Ponte Vecchio.
Yeah. And I think, it's not that, it's even like Google Maps, it's only maybe like 7 minutes, if that, 10 minutes tops.
Is it not farther than that?
No, I think it's like 15 or 20 from the Duomo. So if you're trying to it's also hard though, because there's so much to see on that little walk. There's a lot of stopping. There's a lot of popping into shops and things like that, it kind of, I think it feels, it took us like a half an hour to walk what is essentially not that far. But again, it's also in the sun, super hot. And I keep bringing this up because if you're going to Florence in the winter, that's not an issue. Or if you're going spring and fall, it's not an issue. But if you're going in the summer when everybody else is going, it's another one of those cities that's like black stones on the ground, tight, everything's tightly packed. And you can kind of some streets just turn into ovens while others are nice and cool. But then no, the PD Palace is, great. Apparently we have not obviously been in, but that is for a lot of people on that little trifecta of the art tour.
Yes.
And of course to get there you have to cross the Ponte Vecchio, which is the bridge with the shops on it. If you have not heard of the Ponte Vecchio, somehow I had not heard of the Ponte Vecchio before going to Florence.
Really?
Yeah, I think it was just sort of
remember that. Yeah. I was really befuddled by that.
Well, I think it was something I'd read once in a book. It was but fictional. It was sort of Thief Lord, but took place in Venice. But it was something like that. It took place in Florence. I assumed it wasn't real, and I was like, "Oh, it's a real thing. That's cool." So there is a bridge with shops on it.
Yeah, it's very cool. If you know about it, you might know that the current version is a bunch of sort of expensive, fancy jewelry and tchotchke shops. They're actually, I went into one, got up my gumption and pretended to be fancy. Not that it mattered. They were so nice in the one I went into. I was just looking for a little trinkety thing, a little dragonfly for my mom. And the shop I went into actually was not that expensive. I think they had small pieces for 30 euros.
Which is not bad because there's watches right across the street for 300,000 or 3,000 or something like that.
Yeah, thousands of dollars on some of these really fancy, expensive jewelry pieces. But it's really cool just to wander around there. It's very crowded.
Very crowded,
on the Ponte Vecchio. But at night is your favorite part because they shutter down all of the shops.
I like it because they basically close the shops, but they didn't I don't know what it is, but it's almost they didn't change their security between the 1500s and now. Don't plan on robbing them. They probably have very intense security inside the shops. Oh, no doubt. They actually, because they spend, it's fun. When you go through, you watch them for an hour, taking all of the jewelry and stuff out of the display cases in the front and putting it in a safe in the back. Some of them you can see the safes, from the street. So it's kind of interesting because it's, it definitely makes you think about robbing jewelry stores. Okay, so if you get the safe to drop into the river and you have a barge there waiting, Fast and Furious 11 is going to be Ponte Vecchio. That's all I'm saying.
You're going to be encumbered in some crime as
I know
assisting because of this podcast.
But basically as they close up, it's really quite beautiful because they have these old I don't know. It's just these like really thick wood. It's all like, I don't know. It feels very 16th century, 17th century.
Mm-hmm.
It's all like cast iron bars and everything's shuttered. And they have to kind of like everybody has to worm their way out of the shops because it's like,
Yeah,
only
it's
leaves
great.
a small opening. And it's like a chunk of wood you have to put there and like lock it with, all these locks. And no, it's really it's a really kind of that beautiful and like kind of practical application. Like it's like that thing where it's like that sort of where that art and practicality mix because it's like this, like it's gorgeous and then
It's
also
beautiful and utilitarian. Yeah, it's like dark wood and metal, and there's like, if you can hear, there's like great like
all this the sound
sounds.
effects.
Yeah.
We walked there once, I think one night or two nights, or one night we walked there on accident and the next night we made it on purpose. And it was really quite just a beautiful. It was just kind of like for a second you're like, oh, I could totally see this happening like 400 years ago. And of course some of them are a little bit like there must be some sort of rule because some people have newer ones but that have very similar looks to them. So it must be some sort of like ruling that you can't have like metal, it has to be kind of
brand
old.
new contemporary looking. Yeah.
It's also there's no, I think I really like it, there's no like graffiti on it, which I think is kind of
That's
nice.
a good point.
Like I mean it's Italy, so
I hadn't thought about
a lot of
that.
things get graffitied. But it's nice because it's like especially when walking by, it's all closed up. It's just all these beautiful dark wood things that aren't like defaced basically. And the view from the bridge, by the way, it's not like amazing. So a lot of people take pictures off the bridge, which is kind of fascinating because it's not like much happening. There's another couple bridges that you can take pictures of Ponte Vecchio, but
or walking along the river, you can take a picture of the.
But it's always interesting because everyone stops to take a photo off of Ponte Vecchio. But I'm like, there's nothing over there but a bridge with cars on it.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you take it from the other direction, it's a pretty river.
It is a pretty river.
A little like cityscape.
Yeah, quite a yellow river, isn't it?
It was when we were there.
Yeah, I don't know if it normally is.
I don't know enough about the ecology.
Me either.
Or waterways. I know it's called the Arno.
There we go. You're learning stuff in this podcast.
Because of the song,
folks.
Oh Mio Bambino Caro.
Oh, I was just thinking because of, I don't know, there's something in town that said it was the Arno, and I was like, oh, nice.
Oh,
And
I just
immediately
really like
forgot.
that song.
So what else are we talking about? The Piazzale Vecchio?
Yeah, the Palazzo Vecchio. That's on the Piazza della Signoria.
Yes.
Right? Okay, sorry guys, I really cannot say that word. We did not go in, right? My mom did.
Your mom did, yeah.
And she enjoyed it. There's also that public piano there, right? And there's like a public space where you can. It almost looks like a very fancy old parking garage.
Yeah, that's a good point, yeah.
You can enter, and that part is public, essentially, is my understanding, because we just wandered in. I think the ticket office
Is down there.
is down there, but there's a public piano. Someone was playing some very pretty music.
Well, there's also a whole other room that has like art and sculptures on the wall with like some I think like plants were growing in the middle of it, but it's almost as if it was like, again, they're sort of basement garden. I don't know what it would have been, but it's free. I mean, you could just walk around there and then, on your way to leave.
I remember what you're talking about.
Yeah, and it was nice.
Yeah, it was free in public. That was lovely.
Yeah, especially though, again, think about how, because that whole piazza is really just hot. I mean, there's a fountain there, which is nice. You can't cool off in it or anything like that. It's just nice to see the fact there's
and
water.
And in that piazza, there's the it's not a sculpture garden, it's a sculpture nook.
Oh yeah.
Across from the replica of David. But I don't think
it has the bronze statue of David as well.
Yes. And some other famous replicas of other famous pieces. I don't think you can go up in there though. I thought
it was sealed off.
I think it's gated.
And that again could be a COVID thing. It's hard to tell. Like it's so many of these things we realize are. Had we done this, podcast once we left, we would have assumed it is what it is. Like that would have been the way it is all the time. But now that we're back in Rome and there's no COVID regulations at all, there's so many things that we just thought, oh, that's the way it looks, or that's the way it is.
But they're different now.
And they're completely different now. I'm like, oh, it was just for COVID. And whether it's like blocking off a street or blocking off part of a museum or blocking off part of a park or something like that, we're realizing that now it was either just for COVID or maybe there was some renovations happening. But I guess finally there is like the big draw of Florence. One of the big draws, or the main draw, is the Duomo.
Right. I was over here really surprised by what you were just about to tell me.
All right.
It's the Duomo. Yeah, it's lovely.
It's beautiful. All right, done, guys. That was it. No, I mean, there's the name of the church is the Santa Maria del Fiore. I think Saint Mary of the Flowers. And it's like kind of the main piazza of town. I think it's not the main piazza of town is at all. That would be the Della Signoria.
Yeah.
But it's a main piazza of town. Very easy to find. Almost all roads lead there because they want you to go to church, I guess. It's sort of between the Uffizi and the Accademia. And that's all to say. So it's easy to find. It's not like you're going to miss it. And that's kind of what this is leading into. And in front of it is the Baptistery with the famous bronze doors, the doors to paradise. They are gated.
Is it doors of paradise or doors to paradise?
Could be doors of, could be doors to.
Okay.
Paradise is involved with these doors. And I guess it really would change the meaning of the doors if it was doors to paradise. If it was doors of paradise, it just could have makes you think that somebody robbed paradise of its doors. Maybe when they put up a parking lot. That's a fun little joke for everybody born in the 90s, I think, or before the 90s, or really anybody who's ever heard that song. Looking it up for everybody who's curious, it's just gates of paradise, so not to paradise.
And not doors either, they're gates.
And they're gates. So
gates of paradise.
That's what they are.
Okay.
And they are kind of gated off as well. Permanently, it looks like you can't ever go in and out of them. So they're kind of like once they installed, never used kind of thing is what the vibe is. You do have to pay to get into the Baptistery.
Baptistery?
What do we call that in English?
Baptistery.
Baptistery?
I think so.
There's not an extra T in there? All right. Not Baptistery. Battisterio. No?
Battistero.
Battistero? Am I just throwing T's in things?
I think so. Battistero.
I think I'm just throwing T's in it, guys.
So you do have to pay to get into...
Baptistery.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, Battistero.
It's a baptizing building.
It's a place they baptize you. It's very straightforward.
And you have to pay to get into that.
Yes.
You do not have to pay to get into the
Duomo.
The Duomo.
The actual church. Yeah, right. It's free to get into the church. However, that does not include if you see tickets for it, it's because it's tickets to get up into the dome itself. And then next to the church, but so the Baptistery is directly across from the church. It's impossible to miss.
Yes.
There's also Giotto's bell tower that is kind of off just to the side, but it's the kind of tall bell tower that's right next to the church. Also kind of hard to miss. The reason I mention that is because there are different levels of tickets for getting into the Baptistery. I'm just overthinking it now at this point. The bell tower, the Duomo, and there's a few other odds and ends around included in these tickets. But essentially, there's if you want to go into the dome, basically you need the top tier pass. The reason I mentioned that is because a lot of people think it's important to see the view of Florence from the Duomo. However,
from the dome.
Yes,
That's
from the dome itself. However, you don't actually get the dome in your vision or in your photo if you're taking photos. So it's more highly recommended to actually go up into the bell tower. That way, when you look at the beautiful vista of Florence, you can do so while also seeing the dome rather than while not seeing the dome. And plus, it's a little bit cheaper. It's 30 euros for the top tier ticket, which gets you into the dome, and it's only 20 euros for the one below that gets you into the bell tower, which I think is quite nice. What do you think of the church itself? All right.
No, the outside is beautiful. Everybody's going to say this. This is not me being grumpy about it. The outside is beautiful. And the inside is very simple.
Yeah, it's a very monastic, I would say. And I say this after... did we go to Florence after Siena?
No.
It's hard to remember. No, you went to Florence first?
Yes.
Okay. Because we definitely went after Vatican, or you just after Rome in general. With
Rome has immaculate and highly detailed churches.
Absolutely. Almost all of them, even the ones tucked away in the middle of a corner somewhere, are tons of detail, tons of little just intricate things happening. And a sense of the more money you pay, the closer you get to heaven is kind of the vibe, especially in the Vatican, right? I mean, especially in St. Peter's. It's sort of a very much it's all gold and mosaics.
Yeah, they were like, hello, God, do you like our art? This is how much we love you.
Kind of the vibe. However, and I think in Florence, it's very simple. There are a few frescoes on the wall here and there.
And that was the point of it. It was created that way so that people would, focus on worship and prayer rather than pretty art.
which is, to be fair, yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, they also didn't have the dome for like, what, 40 years? Or I mean, it took 100 and how long?
140 years to complete the whole thing.
140 years. And I think they didn't pop on the dome until kind of late in its creation.
Yeah, that was like the last thing, I think, wasn't it?
But it's like, I mean, I thought it was basically my understanding.
It didn't have the dome for most of its being built
and also
its
use though.
Yeah.
And I mean, like, if you've ever seen what is that TV show, The Medici's, which is probably not like hard and fast fact, but you can get a little fun glimpse is they actually go to church at that church at the Santa Maria del Fiore. When it doesn't have the dome, when Brunelleschi had not yet completed the dome, or hadn't been like born probably, and then asked to complete the dome, seeing as he wasn't really born when it was started. He was just born and then was like, you know what? That needs a dome.
It's like he saw a cake and it was like, that needs a little bit more icing on top.
It's kind of exactly what it's like. And it might not be like, there might be a art historian listening to us thinking that was not at all what it's like.
If you are an art historian and you want to give us some knowledge, or you have links to your website, please let me know. I'm super interested.
To do some research, yeah. However, I think it's because it's free, there's almost always a ridiculously long line, but it goes super quickly because, again, a lot of people go in assuming it's going to be something like the St. Peter's Basilica, and they're going to have, spend hours walking around but they're like, oh, you pretty much get funneled straight to the dome. There's a beautiful fresco painting inside the dome. I always like to wait until you can overhear like a tour guide telling you about the thing. You're like, oh, okay, that's what that is. Thank you. It does save some money. And then that's kind of it. Like, I mean, you can pay to go up into like I said, the dome itself, and see the view from above. But besides that, it's like most people just, all right, took my picture, I'm turning around now, and they leave.
Yeah.
So don't be put off by a really long line is right. Kind of all that's to say.
I agree.
It's pretty, quickly moving.
And there's another basilica. Would you call it another basilica? Basilica di Santa Maria
Novella.
Yeah, that's the one.
That's the one that they named the train station for. And actually, the train station was much closer to the church, and then they moved the train station because the trains coming in was like basically kind of destroying the foundations of the church. Yeah, so in like the 20s, I believe. That's why it's all fascisty. They tore down like their earlier.
Right. I just assumed they'd torn down the one in the existing spot of the train station.
They actually moved it. Yeah, they moved it a little farther away, which makes sense because now they did a lot even when they rebuilt it. And this is in the 20s to sort of dampen the ground around it so it wouldn't vibrate. And apparently that's kind of something they do quite frequently, is because obviously as we get faster and faster trains, but also heavier trains and things like that, there's a lot of vibrations and things like that, and a lot of people walking in cars and buses and taxis. And like, I guess just the more people, the more effect, I guess, it has on the church. So they put a lot of money into investing in like basically like vibration dampening infrastructure in the ground.
Wow.
Not that we see it, obviously, but I think it's kind of cool because they're just trying to keep that church alive rather than just scooting the train station back a little bit farther again, which is nice.
Infrastructure, man.
Yeah,
Wow.
it's crazy. But that's a beautiful church. Gorgeous piazza. That area, though, and as we kind of go into the shopping segment of this, not quite yet. We have one more little location to talk about. But that area around the church it's got a number of really cute stores. Most of them seem quite like local. Not all of them by any means. You're going to find a ton of like, H&M and Zara and things like that everywhere you go. Puma.
Or just, what would you call the shops that are just like a mishmash of items purchased from somewhere else?
Yeah, it's kind of like not like import export, but it's like not even wholesale, but it's like they buy a bunch of items.
Wholesale. Yeah, you're right. Yeah,
and then
Rome has them too. Obviously, it almost maybe they will look like they're locally made things, but if you take a closer look, you can tell that it's just big box items. Set out.
And on that, and maybe I'll mention again when we get more into the shopping. There's a whole when it says made in Italy. It's very much a grain of salt is to kind of take it with, because there's a lot of, and actually, Liz, I'm not entirely sure how much of it needs to be made in Italy. I do know that a lot of people, what they can do is buy wholesale clothing and then sew on made in Italy labels, as long as as long as it was finished in Italy. Yeah. And it doesn't, and I'm not entirely sure what finishing means, if it's like putting on a zipper, or which is not remotely finished, or if it's like finish hemming a cuff or if it's simply literally putting on a label, which can just be, top stitched in the back of a jacket or whatever it is. Right. It's like that's the last step. There's also a lot of accusations and a lot of proof to follow up those accusations of sort of sweatshops in the north that basically pump out a bunch of clothing and a bunch of goods to be sold that are made in Italy, but it's like not
by a sweatshop.
It's not like artisan made. It's sort of like very much by a sweatshop. And that's something just to keep in mind, because again, we talk about the shopping. We'll kind of mention a little bit more. But I think like growing up, I always felt like, made in Italy. That's like fancy. That's got like an artisan who's like smoking, and he's like, we've got to make these belts. I don't know why I'm doing a German accent. Maybe it's right on the border with Germany. He's got like German parents or something. I don't know.
And you can find those things.
And you really can, yeah. And there's tons. And that's the thing. I mean, like even in Florence and Rome and where we are, and like even like places like Salerno, which is just off the Amalfi Coast, and we'll talk about that in a much future episode. There are places to absolutely find like artisan goods, whether it's paper, notebooks, leather goods like belts and wallets. There we go. Shoes. I mean, bags, there's a huge and vibrant artisan market in Italy.
And custom clothes are huge.
Oh my God, custom clothes are, and I think even for everyone, I mean, and sometimes it's custom in the sense of like you go in and you choose a shirt and they, tailor it to you. But a lot of it is, no, you go and you pay $80 and they make a shirt for you, like from like, here's fabric and we're going to now make you a shirt. And so I know that a lot of people kind of, if they have a little extra money, they like to do that because it's just kind of a fun thing to do. Like, even if it's not perfect, because sometimes the perfect shirt you have to go back 2 or 3 times to make sure it's all good and it fits well. But it's kind of a fun thing to do. Before we get talking about shopping, though, the last thing I did, the last little location, the locale to mention is the Piazzale Michelangelo. And we're talking about this because if you've ever looked at a kind of like a view of the skyline of Florence, like our picture of the skyline of Florence, it's almost certainly taken from Piazzale Michelangelo. It's like the one hill near Florence. Not that Florence it's hilly behind Florence, I think. And basically Florence is a town on the river in a valley. So it's sort of at the lowest point of this valley. But there's a hill just across the river to the left. And that's where this Piazzale Michelangelo is. And I don't really want anyone to expect it being a beautiful piazzale. It is a parking lot.
Yes.
And it's like paved like a parking lot. There's a bunch of buses up there. It's like, wow, this is awful.
The walk up is lovely.
The walk up is gorgeous. There is a rose garden, or is it just a garden with a ton of roses in it?
I don't know, but it's a lovely terraced garden.
There's a beautiful terraced garden that you can wander around. There's a bunch of benches. Gorgeous. Really, it's like quite intimate and
there's that waterfall.
There is that waterfall.
Yeah, I don't know if it's natural.
I don't.
But it's almost like an inset fountain on your walk up.
Yeah.
But it's this beautiful like mossy waterfall situation.
And it could be like a natural spring under there somewhere.
Yeah.
And they're just like, you know what, this would be a waterfall. But no, there's that rose garden that we sat in there for about an hour and watched the sunset. And it's gorgeous. There is a little kind of like cafe situation that sells like little aperitivi and like snacks and stuff. And again, chairs set out, you can watch the view. So like the actual piazzale itself, like the actual like the proprio, the very
like the tip top
of the hill.
Which is
because we went up there and it's just a bunch of people. They're all on the one side, like
filled with people
trying to get photos, and you're in a parking lot. So it's a little weird because it's kind of like it's kind of there's not much happening up there. But then there's some stairs that are really nice stairs, but they're stairs. They're beautiful stairs. And there's, I think most of it for us, it was like the rose garden was really nice because it's on the side facing the sunset, having drinks, chilling out, and it's just like this really beautiful place to like end the day kind of thing. It is about like I would say it's about, basically it's about 10 minutes to get there. And depending on how good you are about climbing hills, it can be anywhere from like 6 to 15 minutes to get up.
6 minutes? You think someone can walk up in 6 minutes?
There's like probably like joggers who jog up hills. I don't know.
Oh, yes, if you're jogging up the hill,
I don't
for
know, maybe
sure.
they're like really
Some
our
speed
listeners
walkers.
like who's like
Okay.
I gotta like get my blood flowing. I need to run up this hill.
Yeah, okay.
Because we didn't go with your mom
We did not.
because it's a little too far away, and we ended up going with my dad and brother when they came, and we were sort of just like, let's just try it, let's see how it was. And I think they took 1 or 2 breaks on the way up or down, but it was beautiful. I mean, it really is like it's probably one of the things we talk about, I think, often with Rome. Or any city in Italy is it's really hard to find green space in a city. Rome obviously has the Villa Borghese and a few of the like little not gardens, but parks we've talked about before. But there really is this whole idea, especially with Rome, that old ancient Rome, that like nature is uncivilized. So the idea is like they just were paving over everything with these stones, and these giant areas that you're like a couple of trees would be nice because it's just baking here. And I imagine in the winter maybe it's not as bad, but it's also kind of I don't know, it's like that whole like mental thing, like like people who are able to look outside and see trees versus people who are not able to see trees. It's like completely changed the mental state, or even the whole like even artificial plants give the same sort of boost to your feel good that real plants do, just seeing them. And Rome doesn't really have that apart from the sort of famous pine trees. It's so rare, it feels like, to find like a really nice green space that you could just go and relax in and be comfortable in. And in Florence, it felt a little bit like that too, because again, the whole old town, the whole Piazzale Vecchio, the Ponte Vecchio, the Pitti Palace, if you're not going to the gardens, because obviously they're private. But you can pay to go in them, but you can't like have a picnic, I don't think. But the whole area, it's all stone. It's all like just, it can kind of feel claustrophobic, especially if, and I'm coming at this, I think, from an American perspective, where we did embrace that sort of idea of parks, whether it's like English or French, I'm not sure.
You're coming at it from a very tree-happy city.
That's the other point, too.
In the U.S., yeah.
That's we come from a very laden with trees, and also, tons of parks. And I think, especially for the size of the city.
Right.
It's not like, New York City, I've seen New York City, it's also awful. I say that half of my family lives in New York City, but every time I visit, I'm just like so depressed. I'm like, can you guys just invest in like a single tree somewhere? And like, we have Prospect Park. What are you talking about? I'm like, no, it's beautiful. It's just like, if you could just...
In Central Park.
Yeah, in Central Park. But I was thinking, nobody...
Trees everywhere.
Yeah.
Yes, we come from a place where there are many, many trees. Most people live in houses that have trees around them as well.
But also like driving to the beach and driving just like any kind of anywhere. It's like, oh, you're passing basically undeveloped land, which is what they call it, but it's natural, beautifully tree heavy, gorgeous land.
Or places where trees have been planted, along the roadside. But all of this is to say that when we visit and live in cities, especially, Rome and Florence, it can be sad when you don't get any green space or you don't see a tree for a while, And
I think that, like, I think your mom actually mentioned, because she was like, I was really expecting to see more parks, and it's like, it's not a very Italian thing.
Yeah.
And I say, like, I don't know if it's French. It's like the Scottish seem to have a lot of parks. I assume the English Jews, they have like Hyde Park and this park and that park.
I was always told it was a French thing.
Yeah, I've kind of assumed it was park. I don't know, but I'm just
throwing that out there.
It's French,
just making up some etymology.
Part of the French accent, park.
Okay. So all of that, again, is to say that it was really nice for us to get up to the Piazzale Michelangelo.
Because it was the one green spot that we had seen in so long, and it was just really nice to be like, wow, we spent like 2 hours, maybe an hour to the sunset, a little hour longer, just having drinks and stuff like that, because it's like, this is so nice. And then, of course, the whole walk down is under the trees. It's, again, quite like naturey, and then, of course, you're back in kind of, you end up at the river, and then it's about a 15-minute walk back into the town. You're passing stuff the whole time. But
you're still in the city when you're going.
Yes, you're very much in the city.
This is not like out in the middle of nature. It's very much in the city.
It's just,
we just mean you're not necessarily in like the historic bits.
Though it's right there. Yeah. So I think...
Yeah. Do you want to talk about shopping?
Now that we're gone on my monologue about being in nature...
Yeah.
Let's talk about shopping. Let's get back to capitalism. Let's get back to the root of why we're here.
From nature to capitalism.
Let's go spending some money. So one of the things I think the reason we wanted to mention this is it's easy to, like, I grew up with hearing about Florence because for whatever reason everybody in my family traveled, so it was common that people had visited Florence, and I have a very artistic family as well, so it was sort of like,
You said
you've
that
got
dubiously.
to go to the Uffizi. Oh, the Florence Academy of Art is just the best. Which I didn't realize was sort of an American in the 80s, and I'm like, okay, it's not quite the provenance I was hoping for. But I mean, I don't know, maybe it's great. But I'd say that like all the American art colleges are feel like the same way. What was happening in the 80s? It's like a boom of art colleges. Anywho, this is to say that it's easy when you get there to kind of get overwhelmed and see like all these things and assume it's all made in Florence. And growing up, we were told me like, oh, Florence has this like really beautiful leather district. And I was really imagining like just leather workers, leather artisans like outside or in their shop, and it's like the hammering sound, or I don't know what leather
It sounds medieval to me.
It sounds medieval.
Or like Renaissance.
Or Renaissance.
Which would both be very fitting for Florence.
Which
but,
would be great for Florence. If it was a Ren Fair. Oh my gosh, you totally did a Ren Fair in Florence.
I mean, that is when Florence is from. It's from
I know, but I'm just saying
that
they really are sleeping on the whole fact that they wouldn't really do anything for the Ren Fair. But no, I think that's what I mean, maybe a lot of people picture it, but you're picturing this sort of like, when you think of like, oh, it's the leather district, it's like, it's going to be just shop after shop after shop after shop.
Of people and artisans making leather right there for you,
And as we found, it's like, oh, a lot of them were imported. A lot of them, and it's part of it too, is it's the same thing, I think, like anytime I start seeing vibrant colors, it makes me start like, oh, this kind of leather. So it's like when it's a bright pink or bright green or bright red, or it's more like latexy than leather, or if it's treated in some way, and it's like, and I'm in my mind I'm going to like vegetable dyes, and like they have it all in a hammer and not like a sewing machine and really thin leather. And,
well, there's a big like open air area where there are stalls of people selling leather goods, and it's pretty clear that those are not made there.
Yeah,
like they're products brought in, put on a little cart, and you buy them. It's not the old version like you're thinking. Well,
it's also, I think, because it's, and I was not traveling the 80s and 90s, but it's like, when you have those friends who or parents or grandparents who did, and then they still have their leather jacket from Florence in the 80s, and you're like, there's a good chance it was. I mean, it probably could have been imported as well then. It could have been like made somewhere else and brought in and sold as an Italian jacket. But it also could have been made there. And so that's all to say there are definitely artisan workshops there. It's important to look around. There is one called the School of Leather. It's the Scuola di Cuoio, which is Italian for School of Leather. Or Leather School, I guess I should call it in English. We just call it Leather School. And that is supposed to be like teachers training students in like sort of old ways of leather working. And they sell their goods there as well. And some people have noticed they're like, it's cheaper there than at a true artisan's workshop, because you're relying on the students, like for labor. So it's cheaper, because it also might not be perfect. Like whether it's, sometimes
they're
like,
learning. So they're not, masters yet.
Yeah. But however, it's more expensive than, clearly like the machine made or the sort of just violently dyed imported sort of leather jackets. So it's kind of this interesting middle ground. If you're looking for because if you're looking for leather goods, if that's like one of your things you're doing there are artisan workshops for sure, but also expect to pay it's like 2,000 euros for a leather jacket is not remotely unheard of. 100 euros, 150 for a wallet is not like obscene. So I think the leather schools, it's more like 50 for a wallet or 40 for a wallet, which is like, okay, that's a nice little heirloom piece, versus sort of some of these other leather stores where it's like 15, 20 for a wallet, but it's like, it's when they do genuine leather and they put the genuine quotations to let they mean the leather that's like ground down and then glued back together,
right,
and not
exactly.
like good leather. So it's I don't know, it's a little bit like a red flag to me anytime I see that. So that is to say, if you are looking for leather, beautiful city to find it in, ton of options, and I do strongly urge you to find like the local artisan handmade, and plus just to kind of contribute to that like consistent I don't know, just the idea that like basically the small shop the idea that we're kind of creating and continuing this
participating in the local economy.
Yeah, exactly, rather than the sort of like just paying somebody who doesn't live there a lot of money for a fake leather jacket. Plus, though, a lot of the when I looked up leather, because I was really getting, for a very short brief time, I was getting into like leather goods, and I was like, I really want to like start making my own stuff. And Italy has a pretty big coalition of it's like a leather sourcing leather from cows that were killed for meat and not specifically for leather.
Right. So the leather is a byproduct of the meat industry, which makes it more sustainable than leather from a cow that was just killed for its.
Because they're like it's unscarred, unmarked, this and that, and so it's like or it's a type of cow that has that tans better, I guess. I don't know. But and it's because in my mind I was like, I thought all leather was from the meat industry, but apparently for a while it really wasn't, because you'd raise them specifically to afterwards be killed for like a really nice piece of leather.
Which is like unsustainable on top of unsustainable.
Yeah. So this, I like that, like Italy, and not everybody obviously does it, but there is a pretty large coalition of in all of Italy of leather workers that basically use like vegetable tanned, sustainably sourced leather only from like meat byproduct, which I thought was pretty cool, because it's a way of essentially like, and that's a big, and we talked about in our special episode on the climate and stuff like that. I know that, cows were like number one on that sort of like, you shouldn't be eating meat. But that's, the same thing with leather. It's like, it's sort of the unsustainable product. However, I think the argument is simply that, there's a pair of leather sandals in the Met that's like 2,200 years old. And it's sort of like, I don't know about plastic lasts forever too. I know that, but I'm like, dang, that's like.
Not in a good way though.
Not in a good way. Yeah. I think it's in the other kind of way. So if you're looking for leather, Florence is the city to do it.
Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of other local products made in Florence. And from our brief stay there, I recommend going from where the Ponte Vecchio is and the walk to the Pitti Palace. There are a few local shops in there, and they have what I think are really affordable, locally made goods. One or two of the shops have not Murano glass. So if you're coming to Italy in general, and you've heard of Murano glass, that is from Murano near Venice. There are tons of shops with that selling Murano glass in Rome. It's not made in Rome, it is made somewhere else, or it's made in Rome and it's not truly Murano glass. It's that sort of, only, Prosecco comes from Prosecco grapes, Champagne comes from Champagne. Otherwise it's, sparkling wine. It's same
pretty
deal.
much.
But there is this like Florentine way of making glass that is similar, but it is from Florence. Anyways, there's a couple of shops over there where you can get really affordable little pieces of jewelry that are that kind of glass, or locally made like notebooks and little things. It's great affordable little trinkets that you can buy as gifts or a memory of your trip there.
Well, and that was the thing, is like there's like paper, like some paper products. I think we found like one, just like paper if you want to like stationery, but notebooks or like bookmarks. I think it's always kind of cool, because people kind of run out of ideas of what to make with paper once they like make a notebook. They're like, what else can we make with paper? What do people use paper for? But it's cool because it's made in Florence. It's supposed to be like, heirloom process made in Florence. I'm putting quotations around that because I don't know what the heirloom process of I don't know what an heirloom tomato is, but I definitely don't know what the heirloom process of making a piece of paper is. I assume though it's pretty cool. But there's a lot of those there's like that little stretch does seem to have a lot of little bits and bobs, but also between like, it's this little area kind of between the Santa Maria Novella and the Duomo, and then maybe like the river. It's this little triangle. There's a bunch of cute shops, whether it's like leather shoes that seem to be made there, or at least like some of them are not made. They are factory made, but they are like sourced from really interesting factories, just because it's like either whether it's interesting shapes or they're German brands that I've never heard of. But it's like, I think some of them are. Funny enough, some of them are orthopedic, I think.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. It's just kind of like, it's curated. It feels quite curated,
yes,
but not in a bad way. It feels curated in a good way. It kind of feels like kind of blending different styles and aesthetics, and sourcing things sustainably and naturally, which kind of helps, just kind of makes it feel a little bit more exciting. There's also like an English only bookstore, which again is like, you're probably not going to Florence to buy a book, but it's kind of cool that it's there. And if you're absolutely bored and you have no internet and you're like, I need something to read, there is, believe it or not, an English language bookstore. But most of this is just kind of to say, like, even with the jewelry, there are other jewelry stores in Florence if the Ponte Vecchio does not have something that you would like. But it's to me, I think that like Tuscany, which is the region that Florence is the capital of, it does understand, I think, that like tourists really want tourists being even everybody like me and Darcy, tourists. Just this isn't like
Yeah.
a bad way, to be clear. This isn't like I'm not negatively saying tourists. Really want things that are sort of like handmade and local or well sourced or sustainable, or something that just kind of screams Italian, for lack of a better word. You know, something that really feels like, wow, this is Italian. And for whatever reason, Tuscany is probably the region that's handled that the best.
Yeah, they really have.
You know, and it's even like, because I think in Florence we went once. It was this weird little like a farmer's vendor
Yes.
thing,
It was like a little local makers market.
but like of farmers. I thought, because it was like olive oil. It was like these
There's
like
jam.
there's
some
like
baked
bread
goods.
with grapes in it, which is
Yes, that was weird.
it's
And
like
good.
scacciapetta or something like that. I can't remember. It's part of it's from the region, because I kept seeing it everywhere in Siena and Florence, and it's just like bread with grapes, which sounds just fascinating to me. It's delicious. But no, it's interesting because they do that kind of thing. It's like they see. It's like, I don't know. But our experience is in a lot of other, and even like in Rome, it's like you go to farmers market sometimes, and it's so clear to be like, this stall has like clearly just from one farm. Like it's in season. It's only like 5 different things. You know, it's maybe one fruit because it's like the one tree that's actually fruiting right now. Plus the gourds or whatever, the nightshades, whatever's in season. And then you go to some other stalls and it's like, oh, okay, so there's no avocados being grown right now anywhere in Italy.
Bananas.
Or bananas. So it's like those are clearly imported. Or so it kind of has that feeling of like you're importing a bunch of things because that's what people want, or you think that's what people want, when in fact it's like, I think a lot of tourists almost seem to want, almost seem to want like authenticity. And it's almost like that we've talked about it, I think, in the Rome episode on markets. Like the Campo dei Fiori is like a very popular market, but you go there and it's just chock filled with like, you know, it's like pasta shaped like Italy, and these little tiny bottles of olive oil that's also like with like spices and herbs. And
yeah, it's not authentic anymore.
it's like there's very little.
Tuscany really has done, and we'll talk about this with Siena, and possibly other cities in future episodes, but they really have done a good job of keeping products, or what am I trying to say? Encouraging production that is artisanal and local, and you know, careful. Like care has gone into a lot of the products, and there's a lot of like they're available. You know, I will say in Siena, I'll talk about it more, but in Siena there's a kind of a grocery store that is local agricultural production, and so they really seem to care about local products, and are excited to share them and sell them to tourists, essentially.
Yeah, and I think
and locals, I should say.
Well, and local, and I think that's the other thing, because I think even like as a local, I mean, even living where we live in the States, it's sort of like I want to buy something that's locally made. I want to support people that I might potentially know, or friends of friends kind of thing. I don't want to, like whether it's a wallet. I'm like, I'd rather support the person I know than a company that, I don't know.
And where we're from in the South, there is a lot of local production. I mean, most of the food we eat is hyper local. Is that like, what is it, the 1 kilometer thing?
South of Italy.
Yes.
So the south of Italy. This is not. I was gonna say we don't eat anything from around. Yeah, the south of Italy, it's like the 0 kilometer food.
Yes. There are a lot of local artisans and makers, but they are difficult to find, even for people who have lived their entire life in our small town or valley. It's hard to find an artisan, if you don't already know them.
I was gonna say, I think some of that though goes back to the fact that in the north and in Tuscany, I mean, we don't know have that much more experience about the north as we do Tuscany, but it seems like in Tuscany they understand the value of an artisan. But in the south, in Campania where we live, there's a guy who, for instance, he's like 90 years old, and he makes wicker baskets and spoons. Not wicker, I guess, willow baskets, and he makes spoons that he just whittles from
willow. Yeah,
willow
bark. Willow is the tree, right?
I think it's a tree. Maybe it's not even willow. I thought because his chestnut is the spoon we bought before.
You're right. It's chestnut.
So I think like chestnut wood for spoons, and then he has the willow like sapling little strips for these baskets. And some of them are like massive like laundry baskets, and some are really tiny for like a clove or a head or two of garlic. But it's interesting because he doesn't view it as like artisan. Like he's not an artist. He just makes these and sells them because that's his job. And
but again, you have to know him.
Yeah.
Or know someone who knows him, or happen to find him at a random market one day.
But he's rarely at the market, so it's kind of like, where are you selling these?
This mysterious basket man.
Yeah. But it goes to the thing, like, if this were in Tuscany, it'd be like, I mean, you know, he'd have a website or an Instagram or something, you know. I mean, not that you need to have a website and Instagram, but it's like there'd be...
It just seems that there's effort put into getting these products to people to use.
Yeah, especially people who want to use them.
Yeah.
Like you and I, who are like looking for this guy for the last like 6 months because we want a laundry basket made of willow, and we're like, just where are you? So all that is to say that, when you're shopping in Florence, there is absolutely artisan products available. It's, even though it will seem at first glance, it might seem like overwhelmingly a bunch of like imported leather goods or a bunch of imported glass goods, or, you know, just tchotchkes and things like that. That you're like, oh, it's the same old. It might take a little bit of digging, but I think you absolutely will be able to find what you're looking for. Mm-hmm. And I think that's it for this episode.
I think that's it. I think we covered it.
Think we covered it? Did a good job? You know, we have a script kind of, but like we don't necessarily stick to it. And then
it also it's hot right now. I am feeling hot.
Yeah, that's the other thing. It's, I don't know, it's like 3:30, so it's the height of heat in the day.
Our little fan is working very hard.
Yeah, it's
to keep
over
us
the
cool.
corner, just spitting air at us, hoping that we don't overheat. And with all that being said, thank you so much for watching, for listening.
Thanks for watching your computer screen or phone.
Yeah, I mean, that'd be kind of cool. Thanks for staring off into space while you listen to us talk.
Mm-hmm.
And we hope that you will follow us on Instagram. Darcy is revamping the Instagram because first it was Nathaniel doing it, and boy, that was a disaster.
It's hard. I mean, y'all know it's hard to do social media. So we're trying our best to revamp the Instagram. We have a website.
Yeah, onlybag.com. Cheers, Jinx. What is it? Jinx. All right. And I think that's everything. Thank you so much for listening to this episode.
Yeah, and we'll talk to you next time.
Stay cool if you guys are also going through a heat wave.
Yeah. Stay safe.
Stay safe. Yeah.
Climate's crazy right now.
Have some water. Just drink a couple glasses of water. And until next time, thank you so much for listening.
Thanks for listening.